welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rachel. Glad to be on.
Excited to have you here for our second episode. Before we get started, I want to start by having you give kind of your 60-second elevator pitch. So who are you? What do you do? And why do you do what you do?
So I am an architect, and I was motivated to be that because my dad was an architect. So I saw that from when I was a little kid, and it inspired me. Thought maybe later in life I might want to do other things, but I kept returning to architecture. So went to school, undergrad and grad for that, and have been practicing for a little over 25 years. So
nice. Yeah. Very exciting. So you and I have had the chance to work together now for a few months, and I've heard some of your story, and it's really interesting how you kind of your background, your experiences, and how they led you to where you are today and why you do what you do. Can you share with everybody a little bit of like what your background is, your experiences, and then how you came to be an architect, besides the fact that your father was one?
Sure. I love anything that has to do with being well made. And to me, architecture was really a way to think about something, plan it out, and put parts together, both in a group sort of formative way and also materially. And so I really was inspired by a lot of things around me that I think are well made, well thought out, and thought that I would want to be engaged in that. And then you put on top of that maybe the potential to be able to have it have some meaning. And that to me was the icing on the cake, is that you could really think about nature or human-made things and appreciate the good aspects of that and help to push that along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you grew up in Nigeria, correct?
That's right.
And then you came to the United States for college?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so how has that history and those experiences of living in two totally different cultures kind of impacted the way you think about community and community buildings?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I do regard differences, but also think a lot about commonalities. And so being in Nigeria, but going to an international high school really made me appreciate a lot of the world without necessarily at that time having existed in a lot of it or most of it. And so I think that I really kind of was grounded in my own culture, my language, my own family's history. And then, like I said, met a group of very diverse, people from diverse backgrounds. And then you sort of realize also that people strive for a lot of the same things, just through different routes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And over your career, you've worked primarily on community-focused projects. Is that correct?
A good share of it has been that, yeah.
Is there something that led you to those types of projects that kind of made you gravitate towards doing those?
Yes, I think really I am more drawn towards the things that have people as a focus. So I guess in a more direct way, because a lot does have people as a focus. But I love the idea of thinking through the idea with people within either design sort of group or end users or people who are affected by the projects in some way. And so I really like that the human is at the forefront of that whole sort of planning process that I mentioned a little earlier. And so it's great just to always be engaged, ask people at every step what they think about what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You've used the phrase before, and I want to get this right. So it's not just a physical building, it's helping a community realize their potential and giving them the tools to aspire. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, in a way, it speaks for itself. But I do think that there's a latent energy in all of us. And so the architect or designer is just there to help tease that out or to put it into some sort of narrative. And I think where you have motivations or visions that individuals or groups share, architecture or design can help to, I would say, embody all of that.
Mm-hmm. You've worked, like we said, on a lot of different community projects, and some of them are pretty kind of nationally known in a way and have a really big draw. Do any of your community projects, whether it's those larger ones or smaller ones, do they stand out as ones that you're really proud of, not necessarily for the product, but for kind of what it does?
Yes, it would be easy to say they are all meaningful, but I do believe that they really are. And the ones that come to mind, perhaps because of the scale, not and the depth of it, would be, I would say, the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. I think that's a very important project for Mississippi, but also for the country and then for the world also. That one does come to mind. The Gantt Center, which when we were in design on it was called the Afro-American Cultural Center, is also one that I think fondly of, and then there are others that don't have the visibility of those projects, but I think are very impactful, such as the Visitors Center and Park Rangers offices at Cliffs of the Neuse State Park in Seven Springs, North Carolina. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was there something different about the design process for those or involving the community in those that maybe led to a more successful project?
Yes, I think so. I think there was a more, how should I say, left to right, 360 view sort of engagement with the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, where we were able to talk to people who were children or even adults in the 40s, 50s, 60s in Mississippi. So there were first-hand accounts of some very difficult times. And then we were also able to engage with politicians who were in the state Senate, for example, and really products of the civil rights struggle in Mississippi. And then even people who had been well-meaning for a very long time, but were really sort of, you could say, on the side of, were born on the side of those who really had all the power at that time. And so it was really meaningful through this process just to see how people were able to help from within the communities that we were, whose stories we were trying to really kind of emphasize, and also people who were from, quote, outside of what could have been seen as those who didn't get the better end of treatment at that time, but really wanted to either make amends or help to put that community and this country in a better place.
It's really interesting about really kind of pulling all of those different people and all the different stories together on all different sides of it too, and kind of telling those people's stories.
Yes.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about inclusivity and learn about your take on incorporating it into some projects. So it sounds like on that one, you were able to do a lot of kind of community storytelling in a way. Have you done that on any others as well?
Yes, I think that the cliffs of the Noosa State Park, which was really looked at as a community asset, was one that did, I would say, weaving the story of the people who really were originally on the land as far back as a time when Native Americans would have owned that land, to those who, as children, came to the park and the lake nearby and used it, to the park rangers who look after it, to the environment itself, to the physical context. We're able to weave that into not just the form of the building, but also the exhibits within. And I do have to give credit to a lot of people, my mentors who actually did a lot of the original design, Cisco and Dabney, Dabney Staub and Cisco Gomes. So, and then Dave Harden and myself during a lot of the execution of the project. So effort on the design side, but really the narrative and the stories we're telling is really from those other people I mentioned. The people who own the land, the people who came there as children, and the land itself.
Yeah. And we've kind of heard this throughout with community-based projects, that community engagement of all different types is so important, to really hear their stories, hear their needs, to make sure that it gets incorporated, because they're the final users of a project and stuff, and they're the ones who know exactly kind of what's needed.
Absolutely.
Is there any way that you make sure and you ensure that community engagement is meaningful and inclusive to everybody? Any strategies that come to mind?
So it varies from project to project. I think in a lot of ways you look at the end result, and it sort of tells you whether you've done your homework or not. But typically you want to let people know that their voice and their opinion matters a lot, and you emphasize the importance of having them at the beginning of the process. You want to just keep repeating the call for their views, and you want to make sure that it's not a waste of their time. And then some people are more narrative focused. So sometimes you just allow people to almost in free form or free verse, just tell their stories, or tell their vision, what they want to see. And other times, some people are a bit more visually focused, and so you kind of bring physical objects. You let people look at images and ask them to write about what it conjures up in them. Those images could be ones that suggest the kind of experiences that they've had in a sort of either happy or sad experience. And other times it's about precedents, buildings or structures or creations that they like. And you can ask them to just use different colors to rank from I like this, and this says something about me, to this has nothing to do with me. Mm-hmm. And you just do a tally of those kinds of things. So there's a variety. And other times you just let people actually be anonymous in their input. Some people prefer that. And then as you go through the process, you sometimes realize that there are some conflicting interests or competing interests. And so you separate out those kinds of voices so that you can hear from each realm independently. And then you obviously want everything you do to be about some sort of reconciliation. And so you bring them together at some point. Mm-hmm. And I'm inspired by actually a lot of things that happen in the world to resolve conflicts. So I read and research on things like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, or East Timor and the Aceh province, and how the UN and other well-meaning groups try to resolve conflicts there. Or just things that have happened just historically in places like Sri Lanka and even Australia, and how you try to have marginalized people become or try to make whole marginalized people.
Mm-hmm. I think it's like really interesting and important the way that you point out that it's not a one size fits all, mm-hmm. that it really, the way that you need to kind of look at community engagement is, and it's not even a one size fits all for a project or a neighborhood. It's really about those individual people and about the way that they communicate and kind of trying to bring that back.
Right.
So I think like those strategies are really important as we talk about like every person is different. Like you mentioned with anonymous versus your kind of more outspoken people, making sure that your people who aren't as outspoken typically still have their voices heard.
Right.
So, another phrase that you've used.
when did I use all these phrases?
is the culture add, not culture fit. And I think that relates in terms of when companies are looking for employees and hiring employees and kind of building their teams. But I also think that can relate as well to community projects where a project and people don't necessarily have to fit into a solution or a neighborhood, but really want to add to that. Have you experienced that on some of these projects that you've worked on?
It's a really good question. I have. I think sometimes you wonder how the voices of people and their visions is one that is sustainable in the sense that it doesn't then propagate the problems that you're trying to move away from, that you're trying to heal, right? So how do you take people's voices, give them something meaningful, and have them not then marginalize other people in a way? So you try to create work that I would call open-ended, that it's self-propelling, that it's regenerative in a positive way. That I think is the way to do it. And it's much easier said than done, as you can imagine. But the idea is not to have a project then become something that, quote, builds fences around itself in a way. Yeah.
I love that description. Like, because as architects, we want the work that we do and that we work on and we help these communities to not kind of, like you said, kind of stagnate, to really grow with the community as things change.
Exactly.
So, yeah. As a new principal here at CPL, what are you most looking forward to accomplishing?
Us at CPL having enough work, and that work is one that is intrinsically meaningful. And when I say meaningful, all our projects are important, but we want ones also that where we really connect with the client and a community, and we see ourselves not just as designers, architects, or engineers, or interior designers who, or planners who are just sort of thinking about the empirical value of things, but really, I would like us to think about the soul, the heart, the meaning of our projects, and also within our CPL, I'd love to grow our culture or develop it in such a way that we represent, we look like our like the profile of our country, or the people who have contributed to making this country what it is.
Well, great answer. Mayowa, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and kind of giving us an insight into who you are, and then what you're looking to accomplish, and kind of what you see as the community practice here. Before we close, though, I have a few kind of rapid quick fire questions for you.
Okay.
So I know I didn't prepare you with any of these, but what was your first job?
My first job was at my dad's firm, and it was just showing up with my brother, who's 13 months younger than I am, to do office chores. And it was on summer holiday, and we just showed up, and we would run the blueprint machine and help people draw very simple things, run drawings to different clients, just on foot or on our bicycles, and go to site with the different architects. Yeah.
Wow. So you got right into it pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you a podcast, book, TV show, or movie kind of person?
I am a book person, but I'm also an expedient person. So podcasts are becoming more of a thing for me now. So books are great when you can kind of sit down and get into it. But on some of these long drives or trips that we have to take as professionals, I end up relying on podcasts a bit more now.
What podcasts are you listening to right now?
So I am listening to almost any podcast I can find that has something to do with watches. I am really into
the kind that you wear on your wrist?
Wristwatches or clocks, anything that tells time.
Yeah.
So I'm listening to a podcast called Daily Watch Talks, which is out of Denmark. And I'm also listening to a podcast called Scottish Watches. And I also listen to a podcast called Hodinky out of New York. Yeah.
Very cool.
Sure.
Never would have known that about you. You did say you're a runner, though, so watches are always big on runners.
And music, too. I listen to a lot of music when running. But again, the watches have a lot to do with that idea of parts and pieces and well-made objects in a way. I like that.
Yeah. And lastly, if you could win an Olympic medal for any sport, real or fake, what would it be?
Tennis. I would love to win a medal in tennis. Yeah.
Have you been an avid tennis player for most of your life?
Yes.
Yeah.
Since I was maybe 6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this actually is our last question. As a community leader, what impact do you want to leave on your community?
I would love for whatever it is that we do, that I do, to be something that can be continued. And I'm hoping that we at least turn things in a positive direction. But I would like for whatever's left to be flexible enough to bend and change and adapt to the times. So I believe that very little should stay fixed. I'd love for whatever we start to be reinterpreted, to be meaningful in whatever time it is that it's been reconsidered for.
Great answer. Well, thank you again so much for coming and for being on the show. Really appreciate your time.
Rachel, thank you so much. Very, very great questions, and it takes a really fantastic, curious person to be able to come up with them. So credit to you.
Thank you.